Welcome to KS3 Home Learning Pack. The pack is all about old and new. The Home Learning Pack covers the 9 subject areas of English, Maths, Personal Social Health Education, PSHE, Independence, Understanding the World, Science, Creative Arts, Technology and Physical Development. Each lesson has a very similar format. There will be a lesson number at the top. This is closely followed by the equipment. This includes the things that you will need to complete the lesson, such as worksheets, pens, pencils, scissors, glue, ruler. There'll be a set of instructions related to the lesson. This will give you the outcomes and what the lesson is about. There will also be, within each of the packs and each of the lessons, examples to support your child in terms of their learning. Then each lesson will be broken down into activities. Activity 1, 2 and Activity 3. Activity 1 often is the easiest activities and every child should be able to complete these. Activity 2 is about the application of skills and knowledge and your child may need some support with this. Activity 3 is more independent work where children are applying their knowledge and skills to different environments and contexts. In English, we would like you to write about the past and also then develop your understanding of using the correct verb tense, recognize nouns and practice making them plural, explore prepositions and alliteration, and read and answer questions about a story, and finally write a film or book review. Let's have a look at the lessons in more detail. In the first lesson, we'll be writing in the past tense. So we'll need to be thinking carefully about some of the words that we use. So the current tense of walk, when we turn it into the past tense, is walked, and the current tense of wait, when we turn it into the past tense, is waited. There's opportunities in the worksheets to practice changing from current to past tense. In the second lesson, we'll be looking at verbs in the past, in verbs tense. When we change a regular verb, we simply add a D or an ED to the end. However, there are irregular verbs and we need to think about how we carefully spell those words to turn them into the past tense. In the examples below, the girl was running and the girl was happy are both in the past tense. In lesson 3 and 4, we'll be looking at nouns. So a noun is either a person, place, thing or idea. In the first lesson, we'll be looking at common nouns. In this case, an example, boy is a common noun. And we'll be looking at proper nouns. In this case, Adam is actually the specific name of the boy. In this fourth lesson, we'll be looking at making nouns plural. In the example here, the singular is a cup and the plural is cups by adding an S on the end. And there'll be opportunities in the worksheets to both look at singular and plural nouns and also then develop those into your writing. In lesson 5, we'll be looking at prepositions. So this is about describing about where an object is in relation to another. So this could be about under a table, beside a table, at a table, in a table. In the example here, the teddy is on the table. There'll be examples of practicing prepositions in the worksheets and then using prepositions in your writing. Alliteration will be covered in lesson 6. Alliteration is where words have either similar sound or the same letter at the beginning. Most of the time this is used in poetry, but it's also used in other things like newspaper articles. We've all heard of tongue twisters, and this bases on alliteration. So the example here is, if two witches were watching two watchers, which witch would watch which watch? Why don't you try that at home to start with, and then have a look at the worksheet for more examples, and then perhaps develop your own. In lesson 7, we'll be asking you to read The Old Toy Room. You may want to do this with an adult or another member of your family. Once you've read the story, then there'll be some questions for you to answer about what you have read, and also some picture sequences so that you can put the story in order. In lesson 8, we'll be looking at book or a film review. This is your opportunity to have some free writing on a theme that you want to write about. There's 3 examples of book reviews for you to try. Select the right one that is appropriate for you and then write your book or film review. Why not then, when you've read that, ensure that you then send that into your teacher on WeDuck so that they can read about the books or films that you've been watching or reading at home. Across the 8 maths lessons, we would like you to work on telling the time, including analog and digital, and converting between the two, exploring capacity and volume, and working on your measuring, and an opportunity to practice your fractions, including halves and quarters, writing fractions, and also comparing them. In the first 3 lessons of maths, we'll be looking at analog and digital time. In the first lessons, we'll be looking at telling the time on an analog clock. We'll be starting by looking at o'clock. This is when the large hand is at the top, and then half past, and then we'll be looking at quarter past and quarter to. There'll be opportunities such as this example here, where we'll then be able to tell and mark our time on an analog clock. The large hand, because it is 5 o'clock, goes to the top, and then the small hand goes to number 5. We'll then be progressing on to converting time. So the example here is a clock, analog clock, and the digital time will be 0, 8, and then 15. We have to remember that the 0 goes before all the numbers up to 12 o'clock, and then beyond there we'll then need to add the time on to 12. In this example here is an example where we have 2 p.m. which converts to 1400, so that is 12 add 2, which equals 14, and again as we have 3, which will then convert to 1500 hours. In the next set of lessons, we'll be looking at capacity, volume, and measuring. We will be starting by using keywords such as full, half full, and empty to describe the capacity and volume. We'll then be looking at measuring. In all measuring activities, it is really important that we look at the scale. In this example, we have various marks on the side of our scale. We must remember that it always starts with 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this final one is 5. So on the example here, as we're measuring across the line, it's at 4, so it is 4 milliliters. As well as measuring, we'll also be asking you to actually add the measurements to objects. So this example here, we need to be measuring 2 litres and 500 milliliters. So as we go up the scale, this will be 1, 2, and then the point here is 500 in the middle, so the mark will be here. So this is 2 litres and 500 milliliters of liquid. The final lessons in these series will all be devoted to fractions. In the first lessons, we'll be looking at shapes and how we divide them. So we can divide them by half, and we can divide them into quarters. That will progress on to then being able to shade in shapes in terms of the fraction. So in this case, we can shade in 1/4 of the circle. And finally, we will be looking at fractions. So in this example, we must remember that we have a numerator, which is the top number, which is the number of parts that we have, and then we have the denominator, which is the total parts of the whole. So as an example of 2/5, we have here a circle, which is divided into 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which makes the whole. So that gives us our denominator number. And if I just change colour, we have 1 and 2 parts shaded in, which gives us our numerator. In the final maths lessons, we'll be looking at how you are able to write fractions. In the first example here, if we remember our examples about our numerators and denominators, our fraction denominator is 1, 2, 3, 4. So our denominator is 4, and we have eaten 2 parts. So we have 2/4. The lesson will also progress into how we convert fractions. So actually 2/4 as a fraction could also equal 1/2. and this is the same. And so the last task of this, which is the most difficult task on this worksheet, will be actually you looking at different fractions and deciding which ones are greater than, less than, or are equal to each other. Let's now have a look at the Key Stage 3 Old and New Wider Learning Pack. We're going to start the lessons with some creative arts. In this case, we're going to be looking at practicing some hatching, which is using lines, and then how we might be able to use lines to interpret our mood or even things like music. And finally then using line drawings to create an image and to colour in an image. In contrast to that, we're going to be looking at Andy Warhol and about pop art and using vibrant colours to replace images so that we can create different forms of art. And we've got a challenge for you in terms of colouring in either Campbell's soup tin or a Coca-Cola can to create an image with multiple images. Independence lessons are divided into two sets of lessons. The first two lessons will be focusing on banks and also about how you create a bank account and the information that you will need to present to be able to open up a bank account of your own. And then also a recap on budgeting and using money to create a budget and to understand how we budget to be able to save up for things that we might want to buy. In the cooking lessons, we're going to start by looking at safety in the kitchen and also specifically about using sharp knives. And then there's an opportunity to create two meals. The first one here being apple crumble, and then the other one being a chicken pasta bake. You'll be able to have an opportunity to change some of the ingredients in there, subject to what you may be able to find in your own kitchen at home. In science, we're going to start by looking at materials and their properties. So, for example, your table may be made out of wood, whereas you wouldn't necessarily want your duvet made out of wood. You would want it to be made out of a material with more softer properties, such as cotton. We're then going to look at metals and alloys and what their uses are, and what metal and alloys are used for what purposes. And then finally, we've got some experiments related to change of states, where we will be moving from gases to liquids and to solids. We'll also be looking at the differences between irreversible and reversible changes. An example of a reversible change is here, where you can cool liquid to create ice and you can heat ice up to create liquid. An irreversible change will be actually putting a slice of bread into the toaster and toasting it, because once you've actually made that change, you cannot reverse it back to make a slice of bread. In understanding the world, we're going to be looking at extinct and endangered animals. For extinct animals, we're going to be looking at the dinosaurs, but also then considering the fact that we have many endangered animals in our world at the moment and what that means in terms of their survival and what we can do to support them. In PSHE, we're going to start by exploring, first of all, the Great Fire of London, and then considering about modern technologies and modern implements which allow us to be able to detect and prevent fires before they start. In the next part of the lesson, we'll be looking at Victorian remedies, in this case, in this example, about bloodletting through applying leeches to the body to solve things like headaches, to modern medicine, which would be about taking painkillers such as ibuprofen, aspirin, or paracetamol. In the next part of the PSHE lesson, we'll be considering about the differences as we get older. In this example, this is the image of the same person when they were 17 years old and now when they're 102 years old. And what does that mean for our bodies? You also have changed significantly in your life from when you were first born to where you are now, and what those changes may mean and what the changes are in terms of related to puberty. Lastly, we'll be looking at the rights of humans for every day and creating a poster related to human rights. In PE, we're going to be looking at two distinct sports. The first one is an old sport, which is rugby, and we'll be looking at passing the ball between each other in a backwards fashion, and also how we kick the ball. In the second part of the lesson, we'll be looking at a more modern sport, which is still based around passing, but this time ultimate frisbee. And we'll be looking at how you throw the frisbee, but also, as the example is below, how you could create a frisbee golf course in your local park. In the technology lesson, we'll be looking at changes in innovation over time. The first one we're going to start with is a very known thing, which is around computer games, and I'm sure you can all recognize the characters at the top, but also then not only how computer games developed, but how transport has developed. And then in the final lesson, we'll be looking at communication and how communication has changed from aspects such as using carrier pigeons in World War I and II to modern technology and using things like satellites and GPS navigations. Thank you for listening today. Please don't forget to take pictures of your work and to send them into school. You can use either email to do this or indeed WeDuck. Please also don't forget that each lesson is broken into a series of activities. Activities 1 and 2 tend to be able to be done more independently by students, where lesson 3 tend to be a lot harder and students may need your support to be able to undertake those activities successfully. Thank you.